Distance to the Moon is a stop-motion animation film about a character called X, who's the last survivor of Earth, and he discovers a ladder that stretches infinitely into space. And he goes on a journey which isn't just physical, it's exploring solitude, memory, grief, and hope. And we really wanted to create a film which was very experiential for an audience, an immersive experience when you're watching it, and offer the audience time to reflect and process as they're watching it.
Welcome to the Portland Eco Film Festival's Global Ecological Cinema podcast, where we share in-depth conversations about fascinating intersections of ecology, cinema, and filmmaking. Embracing the root definition of ecology, we explore what it means for humanity to have, hold, and transmit knowledge of planet Earth as our shared home through the power of cinema from around the living world. For this episode, I talked with Sacha Kyle and Giles Lamb. Sacha is a creative director and producer working mainly in animation, and Giles Lamb is a composer, primarily for film and television. The two co-founded Curious Dreamers, a production company, to inspire creative thinkers, storytellers, and innovators through play, experimentation, and collaborative creation. Their film, Distance to the Moon, is an official selection of the 2026 Portland Eco Film Festival. Giles composed the music, and Sacha wrote and co-directed the film with Victoria Watson. What was it like for your team to collaborate on a film that deals with some heavy subject matter related to ecological grief and grieving? Sacha, the credits say you wrote this film, but I wonder if making it at times felt like a collective, imaginative processing of these themes.
These are themes that I've always been interested in. And with Curious Dreamers, a lot of our work approaches human wonder and curiosity and the human experience. And again, for Giles and I think we wanted to approach it in a way which was like experiential for an audience. So tapping into our own personal experience, but our own kind of interest. And I think that we kind of zoom in and look at a moment that's of interest to us. And that wasn't really the moment of leaving the Earth or arriving on the moon. It was what happens in between. And what is that journey? And what does that mean? And how does that feel? And how does a person experience that? So that's kind of what we wanted to really focus on and zoom in on. And I think with the themes of the ecological grief, obviously they trigger sadness and anxiety of how we feel with that loss. And I think in response to that, there's also hopefulness of reflection and creativity and action in response to how you're feeling. So it was also looking at that process and how that would play out visually in the film. And another area we wanted to look at was the stages of grief and how someone experiences that. And that's not necessarily a linear experience in terms of the 5 stages. And again, we wanted that to feel really fluid and organic. And we wanted to approach it musically.
For this film, music was an equal partner and actually created the sort of DNA that the film was sort of built on. And in a way, what we wanted to create was this sense of genuinely of space and of escape and of literally entering into a sort of different mindset, a different dimension.
And there's also a quote that might be worth sharing that we were inspired by during the making of it, which is from Michael Collins from Apollo 11. And he said, "When we originally went to the moon, our total focus was on the moon. We weren't thinking about looking back at Earth. But now that we've done it, that may well have been the reason we went." And I think that was something that really stuck with us about this idea of, we're so focused on looking forwards and we don't take the time to look back at what we're leaving behind and the loss that we are experiencing. And I think for him, seeing Earth from space inspired that kind of ecological awareness and that sense of shared responsibility that we all have. And I think that was quite a strong thing for us to kind of think about of when we were developing the film, how this character would feel looking back.
That brings to mind a powerful theme in the film, which is simultaneously loving and letting go of what the world was. Were there concepts, feelings, or fears that you needed to let go of in order to enter the space of creating this film?
I think there's an expectation often to create something which is very linear or give the audience complete answers and all the information. We very much wanted to go in the opposite direction, and it was a very purposeful choice to embrace the uncertainty and look at how we can explore the ideas of connection in a way that would allow the audience just to have time to just breathe and take a step back and begin to apply their own experiences while they watch the film and how they felt after onto it.
Sacha, there are a lot of more than human entities in the film. Are there ways that you find inspiration from the more than human world to guide you through fear, grief, and the unknown in order to create cinema that deals with these feelings and to some extent sublimates them?
I'm drawn to the dreamlike and the surreal. As an artist and a creative, I'm attracted by that kind of mystery and that philosophy. And I think putting that into the work, that kind of otherworldly approach, allows an audience to see things from a different point of view and to process things in a different way, almost like when a child plays and they go into that play space in their minds. It allows them to reflect and process feelings and things that they are dealing with. And I think a similar thing can happen with an adult audience when you're presenting them with worlds that are different to what is of the norm, so that they can process what's happening in the real life from a different angle. And it allows them that space and that time to reflect in a way, I guess, that feels safe because it's not real, and you can kind of go deeper, and it opens up opportunities for discovery that you wouldn't maybe have if it was a traditional setup.
I appreciate your expansion of the phrase, the more than human world, to include dreams, because dreams are part of the human world and at the same time, more than that. I certainly don't believe that dreaming is a uniquely human experience, and it's important to be reminded of that. Giles, on one level, Distance to the Moon is about moving through the unknown. I wonder how you navigated moments of uncertainty about creating music to accompany the narrative material. And going back to the question I asked Sacha, were there any moments when you found inspiration in the more than human world?
It was an interesting process because initially I had my own sort of musical interpretation of the content and the narrative and the context of the film before we really had a clear visual, because obviously it's only when we started making the puppets and started doing the test shoots that we could for real see what the film would look like. And actually as soon as we started, it became clear this is about X. He's human but not human. I mean, he is more than human. He's something much more vaporous than just a solid person, but he's a really very kind of sensitive, emotional character. I think music's a very sort of intuitive response to these things. That's the way I work with film. Was very intimate, very fragile, very simple, very atmospheric. So in fact, we started with this sort of more robust orchestral score and ended up with something incredibly delicate. But it just felt incredibly, closer to him as a character, and I think closer to that kind of emotional core, that kind of human core of us, who we really are, right at the heart of what it is to be a human being.
Speaking of what it means to be human, I often wonder what will happen to the tender and beautiful aspects of humanity, like the music, the books, and even the proverbial teddy bears that tie humanity to our imagination, our complexity, and even our innocence. In what ways do you think the arts can help bring humanity back more into balance with the natural world? Can we fall back in love with the beauty that humanity is capable of instead of succumbing to our destructive impulses?
I do think that creativity in art brings hope. It brings a new way of seeing things, a way of understanding different points of view and showing empathy for different types of people and different situations. And I think without art, we wouldn't have that hope. And I think that's something we all need, especially right now. And it's about how we choose to live and how we choose to connect with other humans and also our environment.
And I think for me, underlying all that is we need to listen. And it's that idea of actually stopping and listening. And I think that's fundamentally what we've stopped doing. The process of listening places us us as humans within a space, art and creativity we can draw on to sort of help us understand our role within the environment and how we can work with the environment. Most people I know are really trying to work out, well, what actually is it to be a human being? And I think that we, as a human being, we are part of the environment.
And that includes the psychic environment as well as the physical environment. As the director of an international ecological film festival, I have the privilege of tuning into the global ecological consciousness of the moment. And it's amazing how that manifests year to year. Last year, for example, we received a lot of films with a very concrete theme of homecoming. And this year, we received a lot of films that deal very specifically with listening and curiosity. So it's really interesting to think about how there is a collective ecological consciousness and how that manifests through the arts, too. Giles, what was it like for you to create music that was, in a sense, inspired by the moon?
The way I work, I start just playing and improvising, and then something emerges. I had a very strong sense of this idea of we're on the planet and it's intense and we're we're trying to get somewhere, we're trying to escape. And then there's this gravity, the environment, the atmosphere. And then suddenly to break out of that, suddenly to actually be in genuine nothingness. Because you think, well, space is vast, but there's nothing there. So it's actually incredibly intimate. And it's almost that moment of true intimacy where we're really within ourselves. And I think that totally translates with this idea that we see the whole planet in one thing. We're this tiny dot. We are an atom in the kind of universe. And as I played it was about that true intimacy and quiet. And then really everything kind of emerged from there.
Speaking of imagining different realities, we're featuring your film in a program called Expansive Ecological Imagination. And I think a lot of people, myself included, would like to expand our individual and collective imagination around ecological grief and grieving. I think it's something that deserves our imagination and sort of demands it. I wonder if you can share some thoughts and lessons about expanding our imaginations around ecological grief and grieving, informed by the process of making Distance to the Moon.
I think the way that we approach our work sometimes scares people because we're very intuitive, we're very open, and we don't need certainty. We like kind of jumping into the unknown. And I think that's quite good for the soul. It's playful and it can create an energy and a spirit that I would encourage people to try and to go toward. And like Giles was saying earlier, take time to stop and listen and feel and experience and look around us. We don't do that enough. Everyone's always rushing, getting to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, trying to find happiness, trying to fill the hole. And to really use that imagination, like you say, and have space for that imagination, we need to take space to allow that to happen, to allow ourselves to think freely and to think for ourselves, to be inspired by what's around us and to question what's around us in order to take the lessons and create action from that. I think it's important to allow for space to dream and to wonder and to look at the moon.
I think the key word there is allow. I think people, they can be intimidated by it because it's about you letting go of control. If you just let the process happen, it'll happen beautifully, but you have to let it happen.
Speaking of trusting the process, this next request is a bit unconventional, but I'm sure you two are up to it. Please share a few questions for people to consider after they've watched Distance to the Moon.
I would say invite them to ask themselves what's important to them and to nurture those relationships, whether it be with other people or the environment. Also to allow or ask themselves if they've allowed themselves to take time to breathe and process and reflect recently. And then also ask themselves to allow themselves, again, I guess it's about giving themselves permission or an invitation to take time to live and see the world and see what's around them that's not through a screen, even though we're talking about films. Films can inspire you, as you say. What do you do after? What do you do after you're inspired? Or what do you do after you've read something in a book that really inspires you, or you've listened to a piece of music that's really inspired you, or a film that's inspired you? Take time to go and experience those feelings and to process those feelings, to share and discuss and connect with people.
I love that we've returned to the word allow so many times, because I feel like those aspects of society that are actually most responsible for us causing the most damage to the world are the ones that are placing so many demands on us. And those demands are so superfluous in a lot of ways. And so I love that we keep coming to this. What can we allow ourselves more of, as opposed to just giving in to so many demands all the time? And what does it feel like to allow ourselves to be inspired and then connect with others in the afterglow of inspiration? I love that.
I would ask, do you think it's time we all left this planet and went to the moon? Should we escape this burning, disease-ridden, polluted rock and go somewhere else? Or should we try and make it something special?
Sacha, will you please share your favorite ecological films as defined by you and why you love them?
So the first one is The Lorax by Dr. Seuss, which is all about corporate exploitation, but told, for kids. So you can watch it with your kids. It's a great one with humor and good music. The second one would be Grizzly Man, which is perhaps something not to watch with your kids, but looks at human ambition and the clash with the natural world. So that's quite an interesting one. And one I watched recently was called Fire of Love, about two volcanologists called the Crafts, and it looks at the fragility of humans within the ecosystem. And the last one would be Into the Wild, which is an older film now, but it just looks at the lengths someone will go to for connection with nature and how that unfolds.
Giles, it's a rare treat that we get a composer on the podcast. Please tell us about a favorite composer or piece of music that you consider to be ecological.
John Cage is been a big influence. As much his sort of philosophy on music as his actual music. His probably most famous piece, 4 minutes, 33 seconds, just blew my mind when I was reading about it. You can't listen to it because it's silent, which is the whole point. When he did it, it was totally radical. A pianist would sit at the piano and open the lid, sit, the audience all kind of waiting for this performance they didn't know. And he would literally just poised at the piano, play nothing for that period of time. It's a perfect way of reframing what music is. Sounds, the environment. Suddenly you're hearing air conditioning, you're hearing the street. People are listening intensely to every single micro sound in the audience and everything. And then another composer, Pauline Oliveros, who kind of wrote the book Deep Listening, and her work is incredible. It's highly minimal. Again, Max Richter, his album Sleep, which is 8 hours long. It's played live. The audience literally lie on mattresses and go to sleep, which is beautiful.
Sacha Kyle and Giles Lamb, thank you very much for making Distance to the Moon, for sharing it with us, and for all the good you do in the world.
We're really grateful that the film's been selected to be part of your festival. Thank you very much for having us.
If you haven't seen Distance to the Moon, directed by Sacha Kyle and Victoria Watson, with music by Giles Lamb, I hope you'll find the opportunity. If you have seen it, I hope you'll talk about it with your friends, family, and strangers. Both the 1972 and 2012 versions of The Lorax, as well as Grizzly Man, directed by Werner Herzog, and Into the Wild, directed by Sean Penn, are all available to rent at the world's best video store, Movie Madness, in Portland, Oregon. 2026 Portland Eco Film Festival is sponsored by Cragg Law Center and Solve. We are a signature program of the Hollywood Theater, Portland, Oregon's premier modern historic movie palace. Learn more at portlandecofilmfest.org and hollywoodtheater.org. Our theme music is from the song Earth Worship by the amazing band Rubblebucket. Our podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by myself, Rosel Medina. We'll be back every week through June with more conversations about fascinating intersections of ecology, cinema, and filmmaking. Thanks for listening and for all the good you do in the world.
Feel like I'm collapsing into myself, yourself, myself, yourself, myself.